Because the President of the United States, we are listening in real time to the President propose that there be a conspiracy to steal the election for the presidency of the United States. A coup, whatever word we choose to use. A dangerously out of control, unstable President of the United States provoking a constitutional crisis. And it's no accident that the generals, in particular, and the Defense Department officials are aware and are now saying out loud that the incumbent President of the United States is the gravest threat to the national security of the United States that we have. This is unprecedented, it is extraordinary, and it is time for the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership of the Senate and the House to demand that this President of the United States resign immediately.
Hi everyone, Adam is here. So what just happened in Washington right now is not normal politics. It is not the usual partisan back and forth. What is unfolding is the most sustained multi-front accountability campaign ever assembled against a sitting American president. We are talking about more than 120 members of Congress on public record demanding resignation.
Some fired-up members of the Democratic on the House Oversight Committee are speaking now after listening to Attorney General Bondi talking about the Epstein files. Let's listen in.
To our lawful subpoena in a deposition. So instead I asked Chairman Comer if he would compel her to come to our deposition. If she did not come, would he force her to, or if he would move for contempt hearings as he did for other people who did not respond to our subpoena. Instead of answering as an adult, he said that I was bitching, which is again, something that would not be allowed if we were operating under the rules of this committee.
We are talking about the explicit invocation of the 25th Amendment by sitting senators. We are talking about a third impeachment debate centered on something that has not been seen in decades, an unauthorized war launched in defiance of Congress and the Constitution. Let me lay out the numbers. More than 120 House members and at least 7 senators have gone on the record, in floor speeches, in formal statements, in letters, saying Donald Trump should resign or be removed.
This is an extraordinary moment, an unprecedented time in American politics, and the world is gripped by this saga. I mean, here it now takes aim squarely at President Trump as this whole Me Too movement, gains momentum. Should the White House be worried?
Well, President Trump should resign. These allegations are credible. They are numerous. I've heard these women's testimony, and many of them are heartbreaking. And President Trump should resign his position. Whether he will ever hold himself accountable is something you really can't hold your breath for. And so Congress should have hearings. They should do their investigation. They should have appropriate investigations of his behavior and hold him accountable.
That is not a handful of progressive activists. That is a documented bloc of lawmakers whose names are in the congressional record, who have made public commitments that will be revisited the moment the political arithmetic changes. And the trigger for this explosion of accountability pressure? The Iran war. An unauthorized military conflict launched without congressional approval, without the imminent threat certification that the War Powers Resolution requires, and launched against the explicit finding of Trump's own national counterterrorism director, who resigned specifically to say that Iran posed no imminent threat. That is not speculation. That is a senior administration official with direct intelligence access saying the war was based on nothing real. Leading Democrats are now openly debating a third impeachment. Progressive Democrats of America is explicitly calling for impeachment and removal over what they are calling an illegal war on Iran. They are describing it as a profound constitutional crisis. And alongside all of this, you have senators like Markey posting "Invoke the 25th Amendment," and representatives like Swalwell posting simply the number 25, both directed at Vice President Vance and the cabinet, both citing specific documented evidence. 3 mechanisms. Resignation demands from a historic bloc of lawmakers. Impeachment proceedings built on an unauthorized war. And the 25th Amendment being invoked in public by sitting members of Congress. All of them operating simultaneously, all of them building toward the same conclusion. And Trump's response? The same pattern we have seen every time accountability gets close. Screaming, attacks on critics, calling lawmakers traitors, threatening investigations of the very people demanding his removal. The louder the screams, the closer the consequences. This is wild, and we are going to walk through every single piece of this documented accountability picture. Stay with me. Before we go any further, I need you to understand why the Iran war is the most constitutionally specific impeachment trigger of Trump's entire second term. This is not about general abuse of power. This is about a specific law, the War Powers Resolution, that was specifically violated by specific military actions, taken without the specific authorization that law requires. Here is the constitutional framework. The president does not have unilateral authority to launch major military operations without Congress. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 was enacted specifically to prevent exactly what Trump just did. It requires the president to report to Congress within 48 hours of introducing forces into hostilities. It requires congressional authorization for operations that continue beyond 60 days. And it prohibits the president from continuing military action without that authorization. Trump launched major military strikes against Iran without a formal declaration of war. Without the congressional authorization, the War Powers Resolution demands, without certifying an imminent threat to Congress, and in direct defiance of bipartisan Senate resolutions repeatedly forcing votes demanding that he seek authorization. But here is what makes the case even stronger. Joe Kent, Trump's own national counterterrorism director, resigned specifically to say that Iran posed no imminent threat. He said the war was launched because of pressure from an echo chamber, not because of any genuine intelligence finding. That is not a Democratic operative making accusations. That is a Trump-appointed official with direct access to the most sensitive threat assessments, saying on the record that the justification for war did not exist. That inside account closes the only possible loophole. The War Powers Resolution has an emergency exception for situations where there is an imminent threat that requires immediate action. But if the president's own counterterrorism director says no imminent threat existed, that exception does not apply, which means the strikes were in direct violation of the law. And here is why that matters for impeachment. General accusations of abuse of power are politically charged. They can be dismissed as partisan disagreements dressed up as constitutional concerns, but a specific allegation that a specific law was violated by specific military actions based on a specific finding from a specific senior official, that is not political theater. That is a high crime and misdemeanor in the most literal sense of the term. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. When a president launches an unauthorized war in defiance of that power based on intelligence his own director says did not exist, that is exactly the kind of conduct the impeachment clause was designed to address. Now let me walk you through the resignation demand block, because more than 120 lawmakers on public record is not a number you can ignore. This is not a fringe group. This is a substantial portion of the House Democratic Caucus, plus 7 senators, who have gone on the record saying Trump should not finish his term. How did we get to this number? It did not happen overnight. It happened through a sequence of specific triggers, each one adding members who crossed the public commitment threshold. The first trigger was the pattern of court defiance. When judges issued orders and Trump ignored them, when contempt findings piled up and fines meant nothing, members started concluding that the rule of law itself was under attack. Then came the Greenland Nobel letter. That was the moment when Trump's foreign policy became impossible to defend as anything other than personal grievance. The documented evidence that peace commitments were being tied to personal award grievances was specific enough, bizarre enough, and public enough that members who had been holding back started going on the record. Then came the Iran war. When Kent resigned and said no imminent threat existed, when the strikes were launched without congressional authorization, members who had been waiting for a clear constitutional violation had exactly what they needed: unauthorized military action based on intelligence that did not exist. And then there were the judicial attacks, the demands that judges should be impeached, the descriptions of courts as corrupt, the characterizations of judges as wacky, nasty, crooked. When a president starts systematically attacking judicial independence, Members who care about democratic norms have no choice but to act. Each trigger added to the bloc. And the 120-plus documented members we have today is the accumulated result of those sequential additions. This is not a static political formation. It has been growing, and it will keep growing as the triggers keep coming. Here is why the preposition character of this bloc matters so much for the accountability trajectory. If Democrats flip the House in the next election, the 120-plus members who have already publicly demanded Trump's resignation or removal are not a group that needs to be persuaded. They are the core of the majority coalition that would advance impeachment proceedings. Their prior public commitments create the political expectation of follow-through. They cannot walk away from what they have already said on the record. Now let me talk about the third impeachment debate, because the CNBC reporting that leading Democrats are openly debating this is not background noise. It is the documented reality of where the conversation is in Congress right now. The argument being made is simple and legally precise. Trump launched an unauthorized war. The War Powers Resolution requires congressional authorization. He did not get it. The only exception is imminent threat. His own counterterrorism director says no imminent threat existed. Therefore, the strikes were illegal. Therefore, impeachment is warranted. This is not an argument about policy differences. It is not about whether the war was a good idea or a bad idea. It is about whether the president has the authority to launch military action in violation of federal law based on intelligence his own director says was fabricated by an echo chamber. And here is what makes this impeachment argument politically durable. It is specific. It is documented. It comes with an inside account from a Trump-appointed official who resigned specifically to say the justification was false. That is not something that can be dismissed as partisan politics. That is evidence. Progressive Democrats of America is explicit about this. They are calling on Congress to impeach and remove Trump for what they are calling an illegal war on Iran. They are describing it as a profound constitutional crisis. They are urging war powers votes followed by articles of impeachment. This is not a fringe position. It is a mainstream argument being made by serious political organizations with documented public support. And the numbers in Congress tell you this argument is building rather than fading. In December, 140 members voted to advance Al Green's impeachment articles. That was a 77% increase from the vote just 6 months earlier. The Iran war is adding momentum, not reducing it. Now let me walk you through the 25th Amendment dimension, because what Senator Markey and Representative Swalwell did is something we have not seen before. They did not just express general concern about Trump's fitness. They issued specific directed demands to specific constitutional actors citing specific documented evidence. Markey posted, "Invoke the 25th Amendment." Swalwell posted simply the number 25. Both were directed at Vice President Vance and the cabinet. Both cited the Greenland Nobel text as the specific documented evidence of unfitness. This is not vague political commentary. This is a specific invocation of Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, naming the Vice President, naming the mechanism, naming the evidence. Here is what Section 4 does. It allows the Vice President and a majority of the Cabinet to transmit to Congress a written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The moment that declaration is transmitted, presidential authority transfers immediately to the Vice President. Congress then has 21 days to vote. If 2/3 of both chambers agree that the President is unable to serve, the removal stands. If not, the President resumes his duties. The mechanism requires Vance and a cabinet majority to act. They have not done so. But the explicit directed demands from named senators create a specific political accountability record for their inaction. Every Markey tweet that publicly directs Vance to invoke Section 4 with specific documented evidence as the basis is a documented instance of Vance being told by a sitting senator that the conditions for invocation are met. Every day that passes without action is a documented instance of Vance choosing not to exercise the authority he has been publicly directed to use. That record matters. It matters because it builds the political accountability picture of a vice president who was repeatedly told by named constitutional actors that the mechanism should be invoked and who repeatedly chose not to act. When the history of this moment is written, the record will show that the demands were made, the evidence was cited, and the vice president did nothing. The 120-plus member resignation demand bloc is the largest documented congressional accountability formation in modern American history. It is not a static group. It has grown through a sequence of triggers, each one adding members who cross the public commitment threshold. And its preposition character means that if Democrats flip the House, the core of the impeachment coalition is already in place, already on the record, already committed to accountability. The Iran war impeachment argument is the most legally specific and constitutionally grounded impeachment predicate of the entire second term. It alleges a specific violation of a specific law, the War Powers Resolution, by specific military actions, the Iran strikes based on a specific factual finding, no imminent threat, from a specific credentialed source, the president's own national counterterrorism director. That legal specificity makes the argument politically durable and legally compelling in ways that general abuse of power allegations are not. The directed 25th Amendment invocations from Markey and Swalwell are the most constitutionally specific accountability demands of the entire three-mechanism campaign. They name the vice president. They name Section 4. They cite specific documented evidence. And every day that passes without Vance acting creates a documented record of a vice president who was repeatedly told the conditions were met and who repeatedly chose not to act. The only variable between the current documented pressure and formal constitutional action is the midterm election that Trump himself has identified as the trigger. He has said explicitly, "If we don't keep the House, I will get impeached." That is not speculation. That is the president acknowledging that the accountability mechanisms he is screaming about are real, and that the only thing standing between him and those mechanisms is the outcome of the next election. So here is where we are. More than 120 members of Congress on public record demanding resignation. A third impeachment debate centered on an unauthorized war launched in defiance of the War Powers Resolution. Explicit 25th Amendment invocations directed at the vice president citing specific documented evidence. All three mechanisms operating simultaneously. All three building toward the same conclusion. And the only thing standing between the current pressure and formal constitutional action is the midterm election that Trump himself has said will determine whether he gets impeached. The screaming is getting louder because the accountability is getting closer. The attacks on critics, the threats to investigate lawmakers, the characterizations of anyone who challenges his authority as traitors, all of it is the documented behavioral expression of a president who understands exactly what is coming. Three mechanisms, all building, all pointing toward the same outcome. And the only question is, which one breaks through first? The resignation demands that more than 120 lawmakers have already signed. The impeachment proceedings that are already being openly debated, or the 25th Amendment mechanism that senators are already publicly invoking. We are going to be right here covering every development as it unfolds. The midterm cycle is intensifying. The accountability pressure is building, and the screaming is going to get louder the closer we get to the moment when the political arithmetic changes and the mechanisms that are already in motion finally reach their conclusion.